Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming to Crypto Mondays. I'm Min, and I'm here with Sarah today, and I'm super excited to have her. So, Sarah, tell us more about your background.
Hi, everyone. Hear me okay? I'm Sarah Clayton, originally from Manchester. I got my undergraduate at Leeds University in new media, then went on to do cyber law. After that, I went into internet governance in London, which is my dream job. Worked in London for a number of years. While I was there working in internet governance, I became very, very interested in blockchain technology because I realized while I was working there that the technology had the potential to render my entire industry obsolete. I was working for a domain name registrar and a registry, and there was no need for them to exist anymore. I got super excited, told the directors of my company, and they were like, wow, we feel like we're seeing the future here. It's really interesting. Alongside this, I started going to meetups in London. There was no exchanges back then, so I had to go and buy Bitcoin and from a Bitcoin ATM in Shoreditch, just playing around with it, And I was kind of getting bored. What was my dream job was no longer my dream job. And I was looking for a new challenge, and people had told me while I was in academia before, one day you might want to go and do a PhD. So I applied to study in the US. There's a lot more benefits for people who want to do PhDs in the US, financial mostly, and other types of funding available. So I applied to go to USC, and I was lucky enough to get in. And I joined the program at Annenberg, studying communication. In my proposal, all my proposal was all about blockchain and crypto, and I've done all kinds of research looking at the Bitcoin scalability debate, or how perceptions of trust can guide stakeholder perceptions in the blockchain community, looked at virtual currency regulation and lobbying activities in Washington around virtual currency regulation. At the time, gaming companies were very concerned about getting swept up into any kind of virtual currency regulation. So I did all kinds of research, and I was going to conferences up and down the West Coast, and everybody was talking about Puerto Rico. This is coming, the height of the bull run in 2017, and just after Hurricane Maria as well, and there were some prominent figures moving down here. So that's what everybody was talking about at all these conferences, and there seemed to be a buzz about the place. So I just thought, oh, well, maybe I should go to Puerto Rico and see what's going on down there. So in 2018, I scrapped my plans to go to Consensus in New York and decided to come to an event on the west coast of the island, actually called Restart Week. And it was super interesting. I met the community there, but Restart was primarily about how to restart and rebuild the island of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. There was still a lot of blue tarps, and there was electricity, power outages across the island still, and but this event primarily attracted people from the blockchain space, coming together and figuring out how people, together we could help Puerto Rico after this catastrophe. One of the days during that week, there was an interruption, shall we say, in the day when some local Puerto Rican protesters came to the event and completely threw the event into disarray. And there was a bunch of filmmakers, media companies there filming the week. There were people from the BBC and NPR and I think The Guardian. And there was a lot of media coverage, press coverage about the event. And of course, all of this got picked up in that press coverage. And some local Puerto Ricans weren't very happy. They were concerned about loss of land, the colonial relationship. They said that they wanted food and water and clean air, and they weren't so interested in technology. What are you going to do with a microchip when the hurricane comes? So while the week was super interesting, and I met lots of people from the community, and there was a lot of discussion on how blockchain technology could potentially help here, that day stuck in my mind. And over the summer, I was kind of meditating on what on earth did I just witness? And I realized I was looking at, the effects of migration to a place like Puerto Rico. And I've never studied migration before in my life. it's like what my research was studying was like saying, hey, I studied the internet, in the 1990s. I could kind of go off in any direction. So I'm like, hey, I study blockchain technology, right? Well, I should go and research this migration thing. What's that about? So I dived into the migration literature and realized it was probably like digital nomadism combined with lifestyle migration that I was looking at. I put together a proposal, and I was lucky enough to be awarded a competitive grant for the work, which enabled me to move to Puerto Rico in 2019. So I moved here in 2019, embarked upon the work, and I initially found it quite difficult because we just had crypto winter and a lot of people had left. And I was like, wow, I've just been given all this money and I don't even know where my participants are. And so thankfully, Pedro Rivera from Crypto Mondays, he made me feel welcome. Back then, Crypto Mondays was at the Red Monkey in Old San Juan, and some weeks there'd be like 6 of us that would show up. It's not like this at all. It's a tiny bar if you've not been there. If you have been there, you know exactly what it's like. And so we'd hang out there, and that's how I got kind of acquainted with the community between Crypto Mondays and Uncommon Entrepreneurs. And slowly but surely, I started to get participants for my work. And as you know, in 2020, everything changed. We had the pandemic. And I was only supposed to be here for like 8 months, just gathering data. And then I was supposed to go back to LA because I had teaching responsibilities with the university. And of course, the grant money would have run out. But everything at the university went online. And that enabled me to stay. And so I was, unlike many researchers, dissertation researchers, PhD researchers, I was fortunate enough to be able to collect data for 2 years. I was collecting data before the pandemic and before the crypto bull run, during the pandemic and the lockdown, and when the economy was closed, and then, of course, when the economy reopened as well, and, we had this huge influx during the bull run last year, and as the economy was reopening, of new people coming to the island, and that certainly affected the results of the work. So it was like a perfect storm of all these different things that happened, and that's what's allowing me to talk to you guys today, because I shouldn't be here, and it's a pandemic, and maybe the same applies to a lot of you guys too. Like the pandemic is what brought you here. You realize, you didn't need to be welded to a place anymore, and you could maybe have a bit more flexibility in your life, or whatever the case may be. So that was kind of my journey to Puerto Rico and a little bit about the work, but I believe Min has some more questions specifically about the work. So I'll tell you the title of the dissertation, and maybe Min can jump into the questions. So the title of the dissertation is Blockchain Migration, Narratives of Lived Experiences in Puerto Rico at the Dawn of a New Digital Era. There was kind of 3 strands to it that I was focusing on. The first one is migration stories and histories and what brought people to the island, as well as their day-to-day lives on the island. Like, how do you guys make friends, or what hobbies you involved with, or just, whatever you do living your life here. The second strand is technology diffusion. So that's diffusion of blockchain technology, how it or if the local community is adopting the technology, and how is it being used. Or educational opportunities in that regard, that kind of thing. And then the third strand is material and social transformation. So maybe the culture is transformed, or the landscape, the local environment, that kind of thing. So looking at how these things have changed over time. So do you want to dive into more questions?
Great. Okay, that was super interesting. And so when looking at your dissertation, what was the typical profile of a blockchain migrant or expat in Puerto Rico?
So most of the people that I spoke to, or at least a high number, were entrepreneurs or serial entrepreneurs. They were creative problem solvers, naturally very positive people, passionate people. And actually what a lot of the literature says is entrepreneurs are not necessarily more likely to take risks because they're entrepreneurs. They're more likely to take risks because entrepreneurs are more likely to be very positive people, and so they don't feel that they're going to fail. So I'd say a lot of the community here are incredibly positive. You ask people in the community to come to an event, they will show up. They're not going to mull at home or give you some silly excuse that they don't want to make it out. They like, people will come because people here are very naturally positive, have a get up and go kind of attitude, risk takers, rule breakers as well. And also, alongside the entrepreneurial aspect, I would say, as well as embracing decentralization in the kind of blockchain crypto space, people who are embracing decentralization in their own personal lives and their professional lives. So when it comes to entrepreneurship, it's plugging into multiple projects that they find interesting. So they'll, how they have the decentralization of entrepreneurial labor. So how they spend their time with different projects or initiatives or organizations or even volunteer organizations, and plugging into things that they find interesting and that they enjoy, and not feeling tied down. Like I remember a couple of my participants describe the people here as, not the typical Midwest cubicle worker, the kind of a bit exceptional or the black sheep of the family, the people that end up in Puerto Rico. Also, I would say people here, they're more freedom seekers. They're seeking freedom. They're operating around, I'd say, like normative conceptualizations of time. So they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I get my time back? So for some people that might be financial freedom. For others, it might be, okay, how can I configure my life in a way where I can live on less, but then I have time for activities that I want to do and things that I want to do with my life, and to plug into all these different projects that take my fancy, rather than being tied down to a 9-to-5 or something like that. And also, alongside this kind of freedom mindset, is people here, they really want to avoid dependence on kind of formal employment, or, like I've already said, or also state institutions. So those people here that I've spoke to that had families, not all, but many, wanted to homeschool their children, and they didn't want to depend on the state for their children's education. A lot of people had a very libertarian kind of mindset in that way. And also, here there's a very much like a perceived lack of rules and lack of enforcement of rules. So, around like the times that alcohol is served, or, you can drink alcohol on the beach, or you can run a stoplight between 12 and 5 in the morning, and that's perfectly legal. So some of those freedoms, or, there's a lot more flexibility here, for people that have moved, and a lot of my participants really appreciated that. Also, I would describe this group, what I describe in the work as blockchain migrants, is they're hackers. They embody a hacker ethic. They're rule breakers. They operate within and around infrastructure that society provides. So if they don't agree with it, they'll operate around it, and then they'll just kind of weave their way through to get the optimum. To achieve the optimum lifestyle, I should say. So whatever social norms or societal norms or expectations there are, it kind of like doesn't matter. It's like, what's the kind of best outcome for me? What's the best outcome for my family? And how do I achieve that and weave through all these structures that are in place in order for me to achieve that? So there was all kinds of strategies used in terms of like the hacker ethic. I heard people talk about alternative passports, maybe from St. Kitts, or Portugal was another place mentioned. Obviously, tax advantages are very important here. And then, so when the COVID lockdown happened, and there was a lot of curfews that, we had to be back at home by 7 o'clock, or we had to be back at home by 9, or there was all these kinds of rules around COVID. A lot of people here were like, well, where can we go? Where can we congregate? If we can't go to the bar, we can't go to the restaurant, we can't go to the club, we can't do, all these places are closed. So there'd be like creative solutions for these problems, like, hacking these systems so that, people here would get Airbnbs. There'd be parties and gatherings at Airbnbs, private residences. Even Crypto Mondays was struggling at the time to find suitable venues. And then there was one Crypto Mondays that was held in La Perla back then, when the suitable venues were quite difficult to find. but also, not always following these rules. People or the community would sometimes run into problems. So I remember there was a handful of events, where like Pedro was messaging everyone, you've got to put your mask on or we might lose the venue for this event. People not following the rules for all these venues. So I'd say overall, a lot of the group, like the profile of people who have moved here, they are very much self-driven and optimistic. And they like people here employ decentralist values in their personal lives and professional lives as they do, and why they are probably so enthusiastic about, blockchain technology.
Wow, that was amazing. I actually learned so much just in that one question. So you kind of went over this, but what is pushing people away from their places of origin and pulling them towards the blockchain-related migration in Puerto Rico?
So I would say, most people here I would think are American citizens. Maybe there's a few exceptions. I'm certainly an exception. I'm not a US citizen. But of course, there are very high taxes in certain US states, but also, you guys have a global taxation regime. You're the only country in the world with a global taxation regime. So between that and if you want to renounce your citizenship, there's a huge exit tax. So there's not really many places you can go other than Puerto Rico where you can sort of readjust your tax burden, if you like. So at a high level, that's like one of the big contributing factors as to why Puerto Rico. But generally, in terms of push factors, I would say the high taxes in certain states, especially as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, people are now, questioning more, do they need to be in New York? Do they need to be in California? Do they need to be paying these high taxes, these high rents? They don't need to go to the office anymore. Of course, we had the crypto bull run of last year, so a lot of people are thinking, wow, I've made all these capital gains now, and again, I don't want to be paying these high taxes. And of course, the COVID-related rules, they were huge push factors for folks arriving last year and the year before. People feeling locked up in their apartments and kind of lonely, and they don't know where they can go to kind of escape this loneliness. Maybe it's really cold where they live, especially, if they're somewhere like New York, and they're not leaving their apartment for a year. So a lot of people came down here during COVID to kind of escape that kind of loneliness and being locked up in a cold apartment. And a few participants also mentioned politics and presidential elections. So it might have been to escape President Trump or the perceived divisions of President Trump and wanting to get away from him. And then there was a bunch of people also getting at once after Biden got elected. They were like, wow, he wants to increase tax on high net worth individuals. So we also want to escape the US because of Biden's proposed tax plan. So they're probably like the main push factors. In terms of pull factors, they kind of go back to several years ago in 2018 when Brock Pierce moved here, and there was a very famous article that came out in the New York Times. And as a result of that article, a lot of people came down here, and there was a number of conferences that were outlined in that article as well. And so people came here for those conferences. So there was Blockchain Unbound and Coin Agenda Caribbean, and of course the one I mentioned earlier, Restart. So that's some of the conferences that were occurring on the island at that time. And so a lot of people who came during that time to kind of just test it out or just attend these conferences, there was a lot of buzz and a lot of hype about the place that came during that time. And it just seemed that everyone was going to move here. That was the vibe of the time. Of course, we're just kind of coming to the end of the previous bull run. And again, people had capital gains. So there was Brock Pierce in the New York Times article. And a lot of people shared that, so even if they didn't come to the conferences, that was a huge factor. And obviously the tax incentives, but also the migrant network in place. So what changed between, let's say, the previous bull run and this bull run is that in the previous one, it was probably more about the tax incentives and that everyone's going to move here for that. Like Hurricane Maria just happened, the infrastructure wasn't really there, and people were still like, questioning, is Puerto Rico the right place for me? And there wasn't a migrant network in place. The difference between 2017, 2018, and say 2020, 2021 to now is there is very much a migrant network in place, and it becomes part of the lifestyle that people want to tap into when they come here. So it's not just about the warm weather. It's not just about the tax incentives. A lot of people were coming down here who were they just came down for a work trip, or they came down to visit friends or even family, but it was just a short-term trip, They had no intention of moving here, but as soon as they tapped into the network here, they went to a few events, or maybe they went on a hike and met people out and about, as you do, joined the WhatsApp groups, and that's what enticed people to stay. So there's a lot of stories, 2020, 2021, of people coming here. They weren't even necessarily coming to test it out. Some people came to test it out, but some people were just here on a short business trip and never left. And there are a few people in the audience. So yeah, the migrant network in place became the primary motivator for a lot of people to come here, and kind of the tax incentives were more of a secondary attraction. And actually, a lot of people that moved, for the migrant network, they mentioned the tax incentives as being like a great attraction for them, but not the primary one, because it's greatly simplified the tax reporting process. But they didn't necessarily come for that. But they said, I'm going to take advantage of this because it's very difficult, especially with DeFi and NFTs and everything, trying to keep tabs on all of this to kind of simplify that tax burden. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything.
Great. And so you talked about the migrant network and talked about blockchain. So how is blockchain technology being diffused throughout the island from this migrant network?
So I would say in terms of local blockchain innovation that's affecting Puerto Rico locally, I would say from my research, I've found there isn't too much happening on the ground locally. Primarily because blockchain technology people, blockchain migrants who have come here, they are here for Act 20 or Act 60, export services business. So they're exporting services, and the government did that because they want to protect local competition. And so in terms of on-the-ground projects, now there are a handful. So I interviewed a guy from DexGrid, for example. So they're looking at using the Ethereum blockchain to implement microgrids across the island and at the time compete with Prepper. So that would greatly improve people's lives here. As you know, we've had a number of power outages recently. So there were a handful of projects like that, but on the whole, because of the government discouraging local competition, there wasn't too much happening that could impact the lives of people on the ground locally. Also, another issue that was cited was a lack of legal clarity. So other states like Wyoming, they've clarified the treatment of digital assets and smart contracts, DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and they've clarified, they've allowed banks to be custodians of digital assets as well. Like that kind of legal clarity doesn't exist here, and it's something that was cited as something that people really want here beyond just having these tax incentives. I mean, Act 60 did clarify, they did put crypto assets and blockchain technology into law to make that clarification about, saying that export services and individual investors, that those things qualify. But beyond that, there hasn't really been too much. I know there's been talk about NFTs recently. I've not dived too deep into that legislation. But there was a lack of legal clarity, so that was another reason why maybe there's not so much happening on the ground here. And also, there's been a lot of unfortunate events over the past few years. So in 2019, Ricky Rosselló, the governor, he He was described by one of my participants as having the right educational background to really push this kind of legal clarity that people are looking for and support the blockchain migrants in their endeavors. But, if you know about Telegram Gate and everything that came out of that and all the protests that happened, and then they ousted the governor. On top of that, there have been natural disasters. There's been, obviously earthquakes and COVID, and then there was Maria before that. And obviously there's been, the press hasn't always been so positive about blockchain migrants either. So a number of these things, a lot of these things have made it quite difficult for this kind of technology diffusion on the ground. However, I would say there's more that has been done with knowledge diffusion and knowledge diffusion between the migrants. And while there might not be stuff happening in Puerto Rico, there's a lot of stuff happening on a global scale. A lot of people here, I'm sure, work for, or founders of like all different projects that are these export services businesses. So there's so many, as you know, you're here, you're at one, there's so many regular meetups and events happening every day. There's so many parties and gatherings. There's all these opportunities to share knowledge. There's a very localized community here. So unlike, say, a Silicon Valley environment or a New York environment here, you're 10 minutes away from a bunch of really smart people, and it doesn't matter whether you're a billionaire or you're living paycheck to paycheck, you can easily find people here. And it really allows this kind of diffusion of knowledge throughout the community, and certainly local Puerto Ricans who have tapped into the knowledge base here have really benefited from the network in many ways. And I have to say, as a side note, I know this is kind of steering away from the question a little bit, but a lot of the integration is typically one way because of the Spanish language proficiency of blockchain migrants in general. A lot of people can speak a little bit of Spanish maybe, or can just get by, but a lot of people that move here, they're certainly not fluent. So the Puerto Ricans that generally benefit from the network, the integration is one way, and they're tapping into this network and benefiting, but there isn't so much, two-way integration. It's not like people here go hang out in the mountains and join the community, the Puerto Rican communities that, kind of stick to the more coastal areas that are more popular with expats. So what else was I going to say? So yeah, there's a lot of also talking about this knowledge diffusion and the local community who have benefited. There are a lot of local education programs now. So one expat started the Holberton School, a franchise here in San Juan, and most, if not all, of the the students that go to the Holberton School, it's a coding school, are Puerto Rican, and they don't have to pay for their tuition, but on graduation, 17% of their salary goes to the Holberton School over like 3 to 4 years or something, and that's how they pay, only if they're earning over 40 grand. So the Holberton School, it's proper coding school, and they have a course in blockchain. But I'm not sure. I believe so. The other initiative is Blockchain Education Network. I don't know if Eric is here. I know he presented the other week. So he's moved here, and that's a network of students from around the world from different universities, and they can take courses. And I know he was talking about plugging into Holberton and offering more blockchain-specific courses there. And of course, since I wrote my dissertation, there have been a bunch of other initiatives that have popped up, some from the local community and some out of this community as well. Like Crypto Curious is one, and there's been a handful of others. So, the opportunities to learn and kind of get educated on these topics is ever growing. And also the incentives programs themselves, they've had a huge impact. So beyond just blockchain, the brain gain that has come to the island, because you always think about and talk about the brain drain of a lot of Puerto Ricans leaving the island, but we're not talking about the brain gain of these new arrivals bringing, a lot of opportunities here. So because of all of this, there's a lot of intellectual power, and I call it like brain fusions among the community here. Puerto Rico is in a position to become an industry leader in blockchain technology, like Pantera Capital, one of the largest world's largest, crypto hedge funds, that's they're in Puerto Rico right now. And, as a result of a lot of this migration and companies being brought down here, around 5,000 new jobs were created between, I think it was July 2020 to June 2021. And the average salary of those jobs was $66,000. And that's a lot higher than the average Puerto Rican salary, which is in the 20s, the region of the 20s. So there's a lot of opportunity here. And while the technology diffusion on the ground is not so visible, there's a lot happening in the space in Puerto Rico, and there's a lot of opportunity as well for this kind of knowledge transfer to occur.
Makes sense. So, second to last question, what business and personal challenges do these expats or blockchain migrants face currently?
So, one of the biggest things that my participants kind of complained about was a lot of government red tape made it very difficult for them to get anything done here. So there was, onerous procedures and things to acquire permits and approvals, and a lot of inefficiencies in processing applications. And, people were just like fed up with the amount of time it took to get anything done. And, beyond, wide and very visible government corruption and there's like nepotism in the government as well. So there's a lot of, that was also a major obstacle for investment and entrepreneurship and ultimately innovation. Also, another issue, business concern, was probably banking. So as you know, you have to satisfy, in order to satisfy the personal connection test, to Puerto Rico, you're asked to open a bank account here, but the banks here won't allow you to have anything to do with crypto, even if it's a secondary thing. You're not even like trying to move money in and out of an exchange. They don't like it, and they will automatically close you down. So the fact that crypto blockchain related activities, like the principal reason why people are here and the business that they're in here. And they're satisfied to satisfy this closer connection test. The refusal to handle those transactions was very frustrating. Also, as you know, island time is an issue, but I would say a lot of my participants said they adapted quite well to island time after a while. But having deadlines getting missed or appointments starting late, that kind of thing. But a lot of my participants said, hey, whatever, shit happens. It's island time. People get used to these things, but other things were took a little bit longer. To get used to. And I'd say the final thing in relation to business concerns was probably infrastructural concerns. And if you were here over the past week or month, you've probably had multiple power outages. Maybe the water's gone out. There's an outdated power grid here. There's also tropical storms and natural disasters and issues in the government, protests, you name it. There's all these kinds of things that can just get in the way of doing business. So I'd say they're probably like the main things. And then in terms of personal adjustment, just getting used to local customs. A lot of my participants said, there's often, and you get this when you move to any new place, there's a lot of complexity with trying to navigate these new systems. And, there's one funny story with one of my participants in my dissertation, just describing, the months it took him to get his driver's license, and he just gave up, and he ended up going to License and Co. And they didn't do too much. They kind of just held his hand and pointed, say, go here next, go there next. And at the end of the little anecdote, he says, just lead me to my driver's license. So, so local expediters are often used, and also the understanding that the laws here are very different. Labor laws here are very different. They're actually a lot more expansive than anywhere in the US. And so companies operating here who are employing Puerto Ricans or Puerto Rican residents, not even Puerto Ricans, that are operating here need to be aware that the labor laws are different, and you probably want to get a local lawyer to write your employment contracts for you, because they're very, very, very different. And a lot of laws here are done. Sorry, a lot of employment contracts here are done verbally, just because the laws are quite strict and they're on the side of the employee. And so there's seems to be in many cases sufficient protection there to just kind of have a verbal contract. Also, there was concerns about safety, lack of privacy and risk of harassment associated with recipients of Act 22 or the individual investors program portion of Act 60, that all their names being published on a government website. And a lot of my participants were questioning, why should my name get published there? I don't see any value in that. Only people that are going to harass me were going to be interested in that information. And especially with some more prominent individuals, or the fact that as well with their information being online and easily accessible, it can be cross-referenced with, say, social media accounts and other things that can also make individuals targets for harassment and potentially put their safety at risk. And there's a little story in my dissertation, if something happens to somebody as a result of that being public, then we could screw it up with the migration here, and we'll end up having a lot of return migration to the United States. So that's a big concern, and one solution to that problem was offered, saying why don't we, if you really want to publish these names, why don't you print these names off, put it in a government building, and make it so anyone can go visit that building, but it's not so easy to cross-reference with social media and other kind of websites or that kind of thing. And again, the personal adjustment, the other thing that it took a lot of getting used to, but it kind of aligned with the personalities, I guess, of migrants that have moved here, is the relaxed rules that exist here. And so there are fewer rules as compared to the US, and as I mentioned, these types of rules provide a lot of freedom and flexibility, like, you can drink alcohol on the beach, or you can drink alcohol until 4 a.m. when you go out, and it's not like LA where or any other part of the US where they might stop serving a lot earlier, that kind of thing. So yeah, I'd say they're like the main things in terms of how people had to figure out how to adjust professionally to their migration here, and then also personally, and kind of how to navigate those challenges.
Amazing. Great. So last question. Can you talk a little more about the media backlash pertaining to some of the blockchain migration to Puerto Rico?
Sure. So I'd say, so for the media, this kind of migration, I think that the sentiment is blockchain migration kind of symbolizes a continuation of economic exploitation of the Puerto Rican population. So a lot of coverage is quite sensational in tone, and in many cases it's very clear to see that the reporter hadn't spent much time in Puerto Rico. Maybe they'd spent a couple of days or maybe 10 days interviewing different people from the community, but they didn't really have a sense of what's going on here. They had a preconceived point of view, a story that they already wanted to tell, and what's always missing from their analyses, not only in the media but also in the literature, the academic literature, of which not much really has been written on this topic. I can only think of 3 articles, and only one of them is about Puerto Rico. But what's missing in all of their analyses is the kind of focus on the community that's actually moved here, the people who have moved here, the boots on the ground research, and not focusing so much on the image of America as a colonial power. You can't ignore that, but that's not the main focus, or the kind of the marginalization of the local population. That's also something that a lot of reporters will focus on, and a lot of things that occur in the media. these stories come out that really focus on one misstep by one migrant, and then it can have, what happens is it makes all migrants look bad, and there is this kind of beat on, because of the colonial relationship, trying to paint migrants in a bad light. And what I really try to do in my work is tell the other side of the story. And, I spent 2 years in the community hanging out with, a number of people here, a number of people who aren't here. Crypto Mondays is a very different place now compared to 2 years ago. And, I spent 2 years collecting data and really focusing on telling the side of the story that hasn't been told, and that's the story of you guys and how you ended up here, and a lot of what I write about, and I think is very important to highlight, is the structural conditions that facilitate this kind of migration. What ends up happening in the media is they focus on individual personalities, or they'll try and tarnish the whole community because of one bad apple or something like that, and they'll criticize individuals or criticize individual behaviors that, oftentimes they say it's like, buying up property. They miss out the fact that, you have to purchase property within 2 years if you're Act 60, so a lot of that stems from the contentious history, the historical trauma, and it's I think it's very important to focus on what are the structural things that facilitated this migration, and also recognizing that people who moved here, what people have given up to be here, moving to a new culture, a new land, maybe learning a new language, moving away from friends and family, that side of the story isn't focused on in these kinds of analyses, and I think that's very important. So the structural conditions, if you're going to criticize anything, the media really needs to criticize these structures that are in place if they're not happy about these behaviors that have they've been incentivized by policymakers and other things. So I think that's super important. Yeah.
Great. Okay, I had one last question just based on my personal interest.
Sure.
Great. So, you did a lot of historical analysis, right, based on the community. And what is your future prediction for 2022 and 2023 in terms of composition of new migrants, in terms of gender and in terms of age?
Oh, gosh. I haven't thought that far ahead, but what I would say in terms of this year, next year is, so Act 60 was enacted at the beginning of 2020. So the New York came in of July of the previous year, and there was an influx of migrants, or applications, I should say, for Act 2022 towards the end of 2019 to get in before the change in the law, because that increased the donation requirement from $5,000 to $10,000 under Act 60. But also what Act 60 did, as I mentioned earlier, is migrants under Act 60 have to purchase a home within 2 years. So, of course, this is the year now where, if you're approaching that 2-year window, if you've not bought a home already, this is the year, those migrants are going to need to buy a home. And I think it'll be interesting to observe what the out-migration is, especially because a lot of migration here is very much correlated with the bull market. And there was an influx in 2018 towards the last bull run, and of course 2020, 2021, and COVID compounded that as well, and people questioning whether they needed to be in expensive states, lonely in their apartments, paying crazy rents. And so there was an acceleration of migration during the next bull run as well. And I do think, because of that, and the people under Act 60 who do have to purchase a house, it'll be interesting to see if they decide, especially if we enter another bear market, whether they're like, I'm not making so much in capital gains now, and questioning whether it makes financial sense now to remain in Puerto Rico. Maybe they made some bad trades, or even, if they move with their family, if maybe the wife doesn't like it. That certainly happened in 2018 as well. People move here and the family might not adjust. So it'll be certainly interesting to see what the out-migration is like, if any, because the conditions right now are very, very different to what they were in 2018. In terms of demographic, what I have noticed, especially as Crypto Mondays has grown over the years, is there are a lot more women in the space, a lot more women. And I used to be the only woman at the Red Monkey, many times I was just surrounded by men, which was, I'm quite comfortable with that, but, yeah, I soldiered through it. And no, it's great to see a lot more women in the space, for sure. But I do think the representation really stems from the lack of female representation in tech more generally, and of course, blockchain, it's even smaller. And that's just a symptom of the industry and STEM and these types of things. So, but I'm happy to say there are a lot more women that have moved here, and a lot more women that have moved here on their own. Because a lot of women that were coming here, especially more in the earlier days, it's because they were moving with a partner, and it was their partner who was in the space, not necessarily them, and they had a family or whatever. But I've definitely seen over the past 2 years or so, there's a lot more women who have come here by themselves, which I also think is awesome. And yeah, more credit to you, to us, because there aren't many of us that are bold in the same way that men are, or have that confidence, to move to a new place and with, no connections, or maybe a handful of connections, or, don't know anyone, and you have to adjust culturally to that new place. So yeah, but I'm interested to see what the next, what 2022 will bring, and of course moving into 2023. And it'll be interesting to see if, as I predicted based on my dissertation and what's happened before, is whether migration really is totally correlated with the bull market. And it'll be interesting to see what the bull market, or what the crypto market does over the next year.
Amazing. Well, can we get a round of applause for our speaker? Great. So we'd love to also open the floor up to questions if anyone had any. Okay. 1 and then 2.
Yeah. Okay. This is Başak from Turkey. I'm glad that you say you are seeing a lot of women during the day, Pascal. So I'm the co-founder of Istanbul Blockchain Women Platform. And association, we turned it as an association 1.5 years ago. We have good adoption in Turkey. We have more than 10 million crypto users in Turkey because of, yeah. Actually, it's depend on our currency. Turkish lira is evaporation after the pandemic. That's why people see opportunity in crypto if they can get US dollar or euro with anyways. So they want to enter this sector or space, and crypto is the one of them. So yeah, that's it. I don't have a question. Just wanted to say hi.
Hey, pleasure to meet you. We should catch up after.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. My husband and I are blockchain migrants, and you've got us to a T. You really nailed that one. But my question was about all of the Bitcoin babies and Bitcoin toddlers like ours who are growing up together in this community, and their experiences growing up, Spanish-speaking, where their friends are also all other Bitcoin babies. And I was wondering, what are your thoughts on this new generation?
Oh, wow. Well, I have to say I'm not a mum myself, but I did speak to a number of migrants who did have families. And so one of my participants, their kids went to the Robinson School, and they had all kinds of blockchain initiatives, at least that's what he said, and he was trying to teach his kids about blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies, and they were trying to increase adoption or knowledge about these things at the Robinson School, which I thought was really cool. Another interesting thing is because a lot of people homeschool, there are a number of homeschool co-ops here of people in the community, and so their kids maybe spend time with different families during the week, and they're interacting with different parents and different children. Maybe they're from the space, maybe they're not in the crypto space, but I think certainly interactions like that these children will be around crypto and blockchain because of these types of interactions and because of the industry that their parents are in and their friends are in. So there's definitely a lot of that here. I know, I remember talking to Luke. I don't know if Luke's in the room. Hi, Luke. Yeah, last year Luke was telling me how his kids were creating NFTs, and they were learning about crypto that way. So I definitely think this really is a hub for this, and obviously not just for parents, definitely for children as well. We're in such a kind of close-knit community here in San Juan. Everything is a 10-minute drive away, unless you're going out to Dorado, and then that's like long distance. But, generally everything's a 10-minute drive away here, and it's easy to get around. And so, you're going to be interacting with a lot of the same faces all the time. And, that's not just the same for us. I definitely think it's the same for the kids as well.
Hi, Dan Hussein. Great presentation. Obviously, we're all here because this is a great system for us, and we're very privileged. I think you touched on this, but how does this unfair system work for other people, and what are we doing to take our privilege and benefit the people here?
Yeah, that's certainly something that I discuss in the work, and there are structural and systemic inequalities here that exist. We're all very aware of these inequalities, and I think the donation requirement, even though it's a legal requirement, that should help in some ways. But there are a number of non-profits that have been set up on the island to take advantage of that donation requirement. Of course, these incentives came in 2012. So there have been a number of non-profits, 1101s that are eligible for this donation spring up to take advantage of that. And what that does is it increases competition between the non-profits on the island. And so one thing I would say is if you have Act 60 or Act 22 and you are required to donate, really do think about where you're sending your donation, and is it a non-profit that has been around since before 2012? Is it a non-profit that's really trying to do good here on the island, that's been well established? A non-profit that hasn't been set up by a migrant, it's been set up by a Puerto Rican. And really think about, how you're spending your time here. Maybe, so a lot of my participants went above and beyond the donation requirement, and they would volunteer for local nonprofits here. Maybe if it's disaster recovery in relation to the earthquakes or Hurricane Maria, or maybe it's some other kind of volunteer effort, or even giving back to the community here as well. So what this also does, though, this kind of, and I'm not saying don't volunteer, this is not the argument at all, but be aware that, there is a genuine commitment to social responsibility here through these types of volunteer efforts. But, migrants here, they have access to a lot of resources, financial resources, professional resources, large influential networks. Things can get done very, very quickly here. It's very easy to raise money here to support different projects and different initiatives. There's a lot of capital on the island. But a lot of these kind of volunteer efforts, they're not necessarily going to be carried out by local Puerto Ricans on the ground. They're just not. And, when people are volunteering their time towards these things, it really does make visible some of these inequalities, the fact that people here do have more time to spend on whatever it is that they want to do. And they're not in the daily grind of the 9 to 5 or financial pressures that other people have here, who are born here, that aren't earning as much money. And, people here, they were born into the system here, and a lot of people will leave after college to go to the mainland because the opportunities there, they can be earning 3 times the salary as here. And so another thing I would say as well is if you are operating an Act 20 or an Act 60 company, is if you can make space for graduate employees. So a lot of the jobs that I highlighted earlier, I said there was around 5,000 new jobs that have been created for a high salary, around $66,000 average. These are for people who are more advanced in their careers generally. And so these jobs that are being advertised aren't always suitable for Puerto Ricans coming out of college. And so there's still going to be this out-migration for these better opportunities for these graduate jobs on the mainland. So if there's something that you could do to maybe open up some opportunities for, young college graduates here that need a little bit more hand-holding so they can progress in their careers and they can become more established here. And rather than become more established in the US, and then Puerto Rico, there's an initiative here called I'll Come Back, trying to get the Puerto Rican diaspora to come back to Puerto Rico. But, these initiatives won't need to exist anymore if Puerto Ricans were able to, take on a decent job straight out of university and have that training and advance in their careers here, rather than feeling as though they have to go to the mainland to get started, to their foot in the door in their professional career. So I think just be aware of your positionality in the space when it comes to volunteer efforts, and definitely continue to pull on your resources, capital, networks to help in any way you can. Also, I think one final thing I would like to say is don't impose ideas here. Puerto Ricans and people in general, humans, they don't like to have they don't want to have ideas thrust upon them. People want to collaborate, So if you have a project idea or initiative to, help, maybe propose the idea rather than impose the idea. Maybe look around to see if there are other initiatives carried out by already, so you're not reinventing the wheel. So if local Puerto Ricans, say there's some beach cleanup activity or some initiative and you want to plug into that's something that you're interested in. Rather than try and start on your own to do something like that, and impose this idea on the Puerto Rican community, why not look for Puerto Rican groups and then ask, listen and ask them to say, hey, what do you need? How can I help? Oh, you don't have contacts in this area? Oh, I'll pull out my Rolodex. I can certainly help with that. So I think there's definitely a listening piece. And also, don't try and reinvent the wheel. Propose ideas and don't impose ideas here.
Great. Do we have any more questions? Okay, I had one last question. I'm here. Okay, I'm gonna come up. Okay. Yeah, so, I've had a couple of friends who've tried to become blockchain migrants recently, and after the second or third month, decided to leave back for the States. And so, what can we do as a community to really try to integrate people who really want to move here but just can't seem to adjust?
Oh, good question. Well, I know certainly for the people that were excited to stay and had no intention of moving here at all, a lot of what they told me pertained to all the WhatsApp groups and, the communications channels that exist here. There's something for everyone. So if you've not seen this PDF list of WhatsApp groups, I'm sure there's someone in this room that can show you if you're interested in beach volleyball or tennis, or even backgammon, or volunteer opportunities, or wellness events, or anything your heart's desires. You know, that they're in this list of WhatsApp groups, and that's a very quick and easy way to make friends and to build your network here. So I'd say for those people, I'd say that would be my number one recommendation, because it is very difficult when you move to a place. I moved here by myself. I didn't know anybody other than the handful of people that I'd met the previous year in 2018 when I came in 2019. I'd never even been to San Juan in my previous trip. So even moving to San Juan, it was a brand new place for me. And, you know, as soon as I found out about those WhatsApp groups, my whole experience had changed beyond, you know, just going to finding out about Crypto Mondays on Meetup and Uncommon Entrepreneurs, just lots of other opportunities to socialize and even learn new hobbies and these types of things. It really does enrich your migration experience and decrease that feeling of loneliness that you can often feel when you move to a new place, especially when you move by yourself and you don't know anybody in your destination.
Great, super, super useful advice. So if anyone wants to reach you who's watching this on YouTube or here in the audience, how can they reach you? And are you available after your talk for questions?
Yes, I'll be hanging out in the bar area for sure. Reaching me, to be honest, I'm not the most professional person right now. I would say I'm about to start a new job, but I'm still in my kind of transition phase, student, hanging out, taking time out, and so I don't have professional social channels, if you like. But if you want to see what I've been up to on the weekends, you can catch me on Instagram. So that says Wicked, S-E-Z, Wicked. Again, like I say, not so professional. And also my email, happy to share. Also happy to share WhatsApp information. I help out with a number of initiatives here as well. So I'm involved with Culture Rico. Culture Rico is an organization that helps to integrate blockchain migrants into the local Puerto Rican community, teach about the history and culture. We do walking tours. This week we have a cookery class if you're interested in Puerto Rican cookery. We're starting up Spanish classes, so that's one of the big takeaways from my work, and one of the barriers to a two-way integration is the lack of Spanish-speaking proficiency. So that's something that we're trying to help with Culture Rico. Culture Rico has we have a WhatsApp group as well. We also have Facebook. Just have Facebook recently, and we're working on the other socials. I also help with FinTech PR. So that's all events in the San Juan area around fintech. The format is quite different to this. It's more like a university seminar with a formal presentation. There's a small charge, but you get pizza and beer. So you can catch me there. I also help with a non-profit in the rainforest called Eye on the Rainforest. They're based in Patillas. There's a handful of people in the audience who have been there to volunteer their labor, help build facilities, and we often have parties there. It's kind of like a hippie commune in the rainforest. It's really cool. Also a WhatsApp group for that, so you can find me there. And yeah, find me on WhatsApp, find me at some of the other organizations and initiatives that I help organize, and come and chat to me after the event.